Hello bitches, welcome back to my channel, and we're back with another speed paint video once again, so you know the drill. If you want to read the full comic, it is on my Instagram. This one is about my new top love language, which is acts of service. It used to be quality time, but I feel like the pandemic really shifted what is important to us, so I guess now it's acts of service. And read more about it on my Instagram, because I feel like whenever people hear acts of service, it sounds very shallow and materialistic, but I promise it's not always that way, or that's not the way that I perceive it for my own relationship. So yeah, check it out on my Instagram and let me know in the comments below what's your love language. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about one of the flaws of the animation industry, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of artists currently are not happy. And if you are on social media enough, you probably might have seen enough people sharing posts regarding a new negotiation for story artists, and there's always going to be things like this for different artists of different positions, but the one this time was particularly for story artists. And these are things that you don't learn about while you're at school. Everything that is regarding the union and the rights of working artists, I honestly never heard about these things until like the very last second of my 4th year of CalArts, and when I was at the internships that I was in, where I was actually surrounded by working professionals. So I think that this is something that is important to know if you're going to be a story artist, particularly because all of the different artists have their types of responsibilities kind of abused or just mistreated in some way or form, but I feel like I don't really know those as well because I myself I'm not a character designer, I'm not a visual development artist, so I don't want to speak on behalf of things that I personally have not experienced or don't know. But when it comes to story stuff, I know what I've experienced, and I can talk about what you can look out for if you're thinking about getting into story, or if you just want to get into animation, or if you're just curious about what are some of the flaws or the things that the industry is working on in terms of the responsibilities of artists. This is it. Storyboard artists right now are trying to negotiate for a new deal to pretty much compensate for the new load of responsibilities that they have to put up with, just because a lot of things like the emergence of streaming services and gray area types of projects have came up in the past recent years, and this has put a load on the plates of storyboard artists' responsibilities. And even if a project is not necessarily a streaming service project and it's just a regular TV show or it's a regular film that comes out in theaters, sometimes studios forget what storyboard artists should be kept within the lines of doing and making sure that they don't do more, because, you know, we could all be doing more. We could all be doing so much that we could just make a whole fucking student film all over again if we wanted to. But no, when you're working in animation, you are assigned to be a part of a certain particular role. So if you're a storyboard artist, you should be doing storyboards, not 2D animating the whole film, if you understand what I'm saying. So in the past recent years, the expectations of storyboard artists have increased immensely, whether or not if you're on a streaming platform or not. So for some TV animated shows, I can see how some storyboard artists are now expected to pretty much 2D animate the whole damn thing, because they have to send the storyboards to a studio, which is sometimes overseas or just outsourced somewhere else, to animate the final thing. And for them to animate it, they need the storyboards to kind of be as clear as possible to guide them through what it is they should be animating, to kind of prevent as much back and forthing as possible, because if it gets too much of that, it just gets really confusing. So it's just best if the boards are as clear as possible for animators. And sometimes people tend to just be like, okay, that means that storyboard artists should just start animating the whole sequence or something like that, which means a lot more poses that you have to draw, or more camera moves that you have to incorporate, or just pretty much like I said, you're just pretty much doing a whole film animated in 2D. But then this tends to bleed into the roles of other people on the project that might already exist. For example, if you're storyboarding on Storyboard Pro, it is very easy to pretty much build an animatic in that platform because you are given a timeline, you can create frames of your storyboards, and you can create, camera moves. So it is so easy for you to build your own animatic on this, but it is not your job to do so. But the studio might expect you to do it because, hey, you have the tools right there in front of you. So now that, the workflow is faster than it was 50 years ago, you should just be able to build your own animatic, right? Well, things should not be that way because you are not an editor. You did not get on this project as an editor, you got on this project as a storyboard artist, but somehow you're also now an animator and also an editor and cinematographer all at once, along with so many other things. So that is becoming a problem in the animation industry because this is just a cycle of studios just wanting artists to do more than what their job responsibilities tell them to do. So storyboard artists really should just be doing storyboards, which means just like a frame that just captures the staging, the general acting, and whatnot, kind of like a beat board, but it shouldn't be broken down so much to the point that you're pretty much animating a whole film. Like, I do think it's okay to have changes of poses, changes of expressions, especially if it makes a story point, but you shouldn't be breaking down like all the subtle nuances of every single little thing. But unfortunately, that's what storyboarding has pretty much become, is you're kind of animating a little bit now, and I have actually ended up doing that for a lot of the projects that I was on. Was I pretty much just kind of had to break down a lot of my storyboards to the point that they were kind of like an animation if you just flipped through them. Another problem with this is that it could limit the chances of people getting jobs or getting onto new projects after their previous one ends because, if you're a storyboard artist, you should be storyboarding and like that's it. But now if expectations of studios keep rising and keep expecting storyboard artists to not just be storyboard artists, but also be 2D animators and animatic editors and like voice actors and cinematographers and everything, like that is pretty much just asking for multiple hats to be worn at once. And while it is understandable that sometimes multiple hats will have to be worn regardless at one point or another at a job, it's not something that should be a constant throughout your entire job, especially when that is not something that was mentioned from the get-go, or if you're at a unionized studio, it's not mentioned as one of the responsibilities for your position based on the union. So that's why artists are trying to negotiate a new deal, because if storyboard artists are going to be doing all of this shit, then they should be getting paid for more than what they're getting paid now, which was, a traditional like storyboard artist salary that is based on just storyboarding. But if you're going to be doing all of these additional bells and whistles and adding this stuff to make things look nicer and clearer and have additional drawings that used to not really be needed before, artists should be getting paid more for that. Another thing is that if studios are unwilling to pay storyboard artists more for adding on all these additional bells and whistles, then maybe they should actually start regulating the responsibilities of their jobs a little better and make sure that the projects that they're on are not forcing them to pretty much build out an entire animatic. This all eventually pretty much becomes a health problem for storyboard artists, because all of this eventually can lead to burnout physically, mentally, and emotionally, and a lot of the times people might be working overtime without really reporting it, because even though you're supposed to be getting paid for overtime work, not all projects or studios want to exactly be doing that, because you will have to get paid more than you originally do hourly. So projects tend to avoid the overtime pay, but what they don't really realize, or they realize but just don't want to do anything about, is that the type of work that they're assigning artists require them to work overtime anyway, but the artists just don't want to share that with the studio because, of course, nobody really wants to be at risk in losing their job or seem like they're incapable of doing their job. But there's just a lot of unrealistic expectations being put on artists to do now, and people are afraid that if they cannot fulfill those responsibilities, it might put them at risk of just not being able to be employed again, and who wants that? So from my personal experience as a storyboard artist, I kind of have experienced some of these things, but I will also say I have been privileged enough to be placed on pretty good projects for the most part and haven't had too much of an issue with any of them, but I still have had experiences that other artists have mentioned when complaining about what the industry is kind of mistreating them on. And I think the one that resonated with me the most is the part where you're pretty much just animating your storyboards, because that's something that is, again, you have animators, you have 2D animators, you have CG animators who literally are there to execute that portion of the project. But I don't know why studios are just expecting storyboard artists now to pretty much do a whole 2D animated run of it, where you really have to break down poses to pretty much, if you're going to storyboard a character running through the forest, instead of just having a running pose, you have to animate the whole fucking run cycle and do like either all 4 or all 8 poses to show the jump and the squash and the stretch in them running. Like, even some storyboard positions now, I see squash and stretch as a requirement for it, but it's like, hey, isn't that a animation thing? Another one I really resonate with is pretty much building out an entire animatic, and that is usually the job of the editor, who pretty much assembles your boards and puts them in a way that pretty much will play out the whole episode in the correct pacing with the music and the audio and all of that stuff. But for some storyboard artists now, that is on them to do for some reason, especially with having Storyboard Pro as the program. It is apparently easier to build out a whole animatic now, but just because it's easier to do that doesn't mean that studios should just start allowing storyboard artists to do that, because it might actually collide with the responsibilities of the actual animatic editor, and it's like, hey, why are you doing my job now? I have to fix the problems that you did that were supposed to be my job, and blah blah blah. It just gets very muddy in that way. But I feel like people should not be expecting storyboard artists to be building an animatic, because that is more of the editing world. You're not supposed to be doing that. You're supposed to be focusing more on the storyboards themselves. And I've had to do some of that myself in Storyboard Pro before, where I pretty much had to conform like the storyboards to this new form of the animatic and adjust like the panels to the correct timing and pacing of the new version. Kind of reminded me of my Cartoon Network internship a little bit. And another thing that tends to happen is storyboard artists end up becoming writers even when they never had that in their responsibility. But there are roles out there sometimes that offer storyboard artist and writer credit, because I do think having a writing credit will be very beneficial for your career. But oftentimes storyboard artists end up writing anyway and don't get either the proper pay or proper credit or recognition for it. So when you're given the script, sometimes there might be gaps of things missing or things that don't make sense. So you either have to fill in the gap or make up something to make it make sense. And that tends to be writing. Even though you're not literally writing in the script itself, in your storyboards, you end up making something because you wrote something in your head to either bridge the gap or to pretty much just fill in what wasn't making sense and make it make sense. So you're pretty much writing, and you might not get credit or extra pay for that. And depending on what project you're on, there could be a lot of rewrites. I've been on projects that have a lot of rewrites, and every time we read the script, there was already a new one that was already out and nobody knew. So I would say that it can get very hectic when you're on a project that is constantly rewriting the show or rewriting the feature, because you could literally be working on a portion of it that's already been erased and you just have no idea, and then all of a sudden you just have to redo this thing all over again, and if there's no solution for it yet, then I guess what, you're pretty much the one having to make up the solution. So the things I've mentioned so far are just the tip of the iceberg, and there are just so many other things that are expected of storyboard artists to do that I can't elaborate on every single one of them, but even voice acting is one of them, because some people expect storyboard artists to put in scratch dialogue to help out with the timing and just get the emotion temporarily right, or they even expect them to design characters or backgrounds. If it's not figured out yet, then the storyboard artist is kind of left to make up something from what they imagine based off the script, and it could serve as inspiration for the visual development artists or even as layout artists, and again, animators, editors, timers, writers. There's so many other things that are expected of storyboard artists to do when there's already a role that exists for that in the animation pipeline. So yeah, there's a lot that has to be sorted out for storyboard artists. So some people might be wondering, well, if storyboard artists know that these responsibilities should not be expected of them, then why do they keep doing it anyway? Well, it's kind of just like any other person out there who is in fear of losing their jobs, because there's already like such a limited number of projects out there in a project-driven career field where, you know, landing on an animation job is already hard to do in itself. So why would you just get fired from a project or let go from a project because you couldn't keep up with the expectations, only to then get back on the cycle of job hunting again and then maybe potentially landing on a new job, but then that job is expecting the same thing from the previous one that you just were let go from. So it's a very complicated situation. So I definitely feel like from my personal experience, I have felt some of the physical, emotional, and mental consequences of wearing all of these different hats. I've had my fair share of some physical pain, some burnout, anxiety, and just other things that I don't want to share right now, but I feel like there are definitely artists that have had it a lot worse, especially those that have been in the industry for decades and years and had to deal with these things. So I really hope that we can strive for a better future where artists are recognized for the work that they put into these shows that inspire so many people and get the proper pay that they deserve and the respect that they deserve, and just be treated fairly, honestly. If you want to learn more about this situation, you can definitely check out more on Animation Story Group on Instagram, or read more about what your rights are kind of as an artist on the animationguild.org. But if you're on social media in general, a lot of artists will also be sharing their personal experiences, either as storyboard artists or artists in general working in animation, and what are some of the flaws and drawbacks of it. So if you follow some artists working in the industry, you probably are aware of some of these things. Anyway, I hope this video did not scare you away from wanting to work in animation or whatever. I just wanted to talk about things that I feel like you should be aware about, because people come to this channel to just hear about an experience of someone working in the animation industry, and this is just one of the truths. So yeah, again, I feel like every industry or every field can have something to improve on and work on, and if we all just remain comfortable and just happy, we'll just stay in the same place and plateau and never grow to keep up with the times. So I think it's important to bring this into the light. So yeah, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great, healthy day. Remember to drink water, as they say. Anyway, peace out and stay wholesome, bitches.